Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Fans, the channel of pop culture, trivia, and chat. Well, today is an overdue episode, as I was going to do this one a couple of weeks ago, and I'll be honest, life just kind of got in the way. I felt a bit tired, and I won't go into too much detail. You don't need that. Um, but needless to say, I wasn't really feeling up to creating this episode. But I'm back, and I'm going to pick up where the episode should have started, which is, of course, about Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming is the creator of James Bond, but he does have quite a interesting history and backstory. And I think, why not? We often talk about pop culture heroes, icons, and fictitious characters. And sometimes it's nice just to look behind the scenes of these creations. I have delved into the history briefly of Alec Guinness as well. And I think it's fascinating because sometimes these, particularly comedians, they have quite a torrid life. And particularly Robbie Williams was somebody who struggled with mental health issues and everything else. And you don't see that side of them. And it's a credit to them and their craft. So the story behind, I feel, with Ian Fleming is quite interesting. He was quite a character. He was born on the 28th of May in 1908 on Green Street in London, and he died at the age of 56, so not very old at all, on the 12th of August in 1964. Now, most of his books and films would have been in production stages at least by then, and he was in the army. I don't know if many people know this, but he was actually a member of the Secret Service during the Second World War. He worked. He wrote his first Bond novel in 1952 at the age of 54. Sorry, 44. And as an aspiring author myself, it's nice to see and hear about people that made it as writers later on in life. So the first Bond novel that he wrote was Casino Royale. But we'll go back a little bit into his history. So his full name was Ian Lancaster Fleming, and as I say, he was born on the 28th of May in 1908. And he was a British writer, best known for Star Wars. Star Wars? What am I saying? Best known for James Bond. I mean, could you imagine if he come up with Star Wars way back when? So no, he's known for James Bond, and there is another children's novel that he wrote, which was a bestseller, and that was, of course, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Now, I'll get into the story behind that a little bit later on in the show. So he is best known for James Bond and spy novels, but he come from a wealthy family which was connected to a merchant bank, Robert Fleming and Co. And his father was was a member of Parliament for Henley in 1910, up until his death on the Western Front in 1917. So Ian Fleming was educated at Eton and Sandhurst, and briefly the universities of Munich and Geneva. Fleming moved through several jobs before he started writing. While working for Britain's Naval Intelligence Division, and you've got to remember at this time things like the Commandos and the Secret Service were in their infancy if they'd been created at all. So we were just really finding out things about espionage and how to handle that in war situations. So while working for Britain's Naval Intelligence Division during the Second World War, Fleming was involved in planning Operation Goldeneye, and you can see how he's used the influences that he had during the Second World War in his writings, particularly with the name Goldeneye. In fact, Goldeneye is quite a special name to him because it was also the name of his getaway location in the Caribbean. So during this Operation Goldeneye and the planning and oversight of two intelligence units, 30 Assault Unit and T Force, he drew from his wartime services and career as a journalist for much of the background detail and depth of the James Bond novels. Fleming's first novel in 1952 was Casino Royale, and it was a success. It had three print runs, and these were commissioned to meet demand. 11 Bond novels and two collections of short stories followed between 1953 and 1966. The novels obviously centre around James Bond, which is an officer in the Secret Intelligence Service, commonly known as MI6. Bond is also known by his code number 007, and in the last Bond film, it was actually hinted at that the name or the ranking of 007 is something that can be passed on to any individual operative because I'm sure there was a scene with another 007. I forget the actress's name. Um, so, yeah, 007 is a commander in the Royal Navy. Sorry, Ian Fleming was a commander in the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, and the Bond stories rank among the best selling series of fictional books of all time. They have sold over 10 million copies worldwide, and Fleming also wrote the children's story Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and two works of non fiction. In 2008, The Times ranked Fleming 14th on the list of the 50th greatest British writers since 1945. Fleming was married to Anne Chantries, and she divorced her husband and the second Viscount of Rothmere before the second Viscount of Rothmere because of her affair with the author. Fleming and Chatteris had a son. Caspar Fleming was a heavy smoker and drinker for most of his life and succumbed to heart disease in 1964. So, Ian Fleming is an inspiration as a writer for me personally and other authors as well. And his books have continued his legacy even after his death. And there have even been new, fresh writers taking on the mantra of Ian Fleming and coming up with their own modern reincarnations of James Bond. So, what else did Ian Fleming get up to? In 1914, with the start of the First World War, Valentine Fleming joined C Squadron of the Queen's Own Oxfordshire Hussars and rose to the rank of Major. He was killed, and this is Ian Fleming's father, he was killed by German shelling on the Western Front on the 20th May of 1917. Winston Churchill actually wrote the obituary for him that appeared in the Times. Because Valentine had owned an estate in Armsdale, his death was commemorated on the Glenlag War Memorial. Early life. So in 1921, Fleming enrolled at Eton College, and he wasn't a high achiever academically. He excelled at athletics and held the title of Victor Laundrum, winner of the Games, for 2 years between 1925 and 1927. He also edited a school magazine, The Weathering. His lifestyle at Eton brought him into conflict with the housemaster E.V. Slater, and he was a little bit of a unruly child, I think is fair to say. So that's a little bit of his brief history, his early life. Fleming borrowed a family purse again in October 1933 and went into banking with a position at the Finances Cull and Co. In 1935, he was moved to Rowe and Pitman on Bishopsgate as a stockbroker. So he come from money. He knew a lot about money and finances. So it just kind of shows that writers can come from all sorts of different backgrounds. Look at how J.K. Rowling has achieved one of the biggest stories of all time. She's certainly the first. I think she's the first credited as the first billionaire author. Excuse me. So if you want to aim big, then she's the one that you're going to have to beat. Um, but no, I mean it's interesting, and I am just going through this off of Ian Fleming's Wikipedia page. I'll be totally honest. That's I've done a little bit of research for this episode, and I'll give credit where credit's due. So James Bond then with Casino Royale. This book was actually the first one to be. It was made into a radio play, I believe, and the first actor at the time to actually be considered and play the role of James Bond, believe it or not, was a TV game host in the 1980s, and that was Bob Holness. Bob Holness was working in South Africa at the time, and this was when the radio station that he was working for wanted to make Casino Royale into a radio play. So, if you ever get asked the question of who was the first person to portray James Bond, it is actually Bob Holness. Now, not only that, well before the film, because Casino Royale has actually been made, I think it's been made 3 times in a film, in film version at least. Casino Royale appeared as a comic strip in the Daily Express and has been adapted for the screen 3 times. In 1954, there was an episode on CBS television series called Climax with, and this is the original James Bond live action actor, Barry Nilsson. Now, Barry Nilsson, you might not know this, is actually American. So, the first person to portray James Bond on screen in live action is actually American. Now, he sold the rights at the time because he needed the money. So that's how the TV station CBS got their hands on the rights to make this particular episode of their series, was simply because he needed the money. Cash flow problems. That is something that he did struggle with his writing career. Was he had successful books, but they weren't prolific at the time. And they didn't offer him a sustainable income for his desired way of living. So he often would run short of money. And Casino Royale was one of the examples where he'd written the book, got offered this sum of money. It kept him going for a little while, and so on and so forth. So, what have we learnt so far? We've learnt that the first person to actually portray James Bond turned out to be a 1980s host, game show host, Bob Holness, and the actual first person to give us James Bond on screen was an American. So, yeah, let me know what you think. So, Ian Fleming. So, the first film, though, was something like the third or fourth book. So, the Casino Royale, as I said, was made into 3 different variations of film. The first one, as I mentioned, was a TV series, but then there was another version which was more of kind of like a spoof, and this was made with David Niven playing Sir James Bond. Obviously, Casino Royale went on to be remade into a serious James Bond film in 2006 with Daniel Craig taking on the lead of Bond. So, the 1967 film version was a spy parody film and probably a little bit ahead of its time as well, because in the 1970s, so just a few years later, we'd have the spoofs such as Aeroplane, which is one of those just fantastic comedy, and I think it stood the test of time. The jokes are so layered that you can watch it over and over again and find something new. So, the original Casino Royale on screen, on the big screen at least, was going to be a spoof. The film stars David Niven as the original Bond, Sir James Bond 007, who's been forced out of retirement to investigate the deaths and disappearance of international spies. He soon battles a mysterious Dr. Noah and Smerish. The film's tagline, Casino Royale is too much for one James Bond, refers to Bond's ruse to mislead Smash, in which 6 other agents are pretending to be James Bond. So theoretically, again, if you want to go down the pub and they have this pub quiz, you could probably add these additional actors in there as playing Bond, because technically they were playing a version of Bond. It was just not in the chronological order of films that we have. Well, I think we're up to 25 Bond films, aren't we? Is that where we're at? So, yeah, that was Casino Royale, and it was distributed by Columbia Pictures. Released on the 13th of April in 1967 in London, it was released on the 28th of April, so a few days later, in the United States. With a runtime of 131 minutes, it was made on a budget of $12 million and probably considered some sort of box office success because it did give a return of $41.7 million. Now, why they didn't make any other take these books and make any more spoof films, perhaps it's probably come down to the rights at the time, because obviously with Columbia owning the rights for Casino Royale, then MGM owning the rights for the rest of the James Bond books, they had to wait for the rights, and it's an interesting story, I think, with how they got the rights, because Columbia owned the rights for this particular book. Then Columbia wanted the rights for something that MGM had, and I think it was King Kong, or something like King Kong or Godzilla, but MGM wouldn't sell them the rights. In the end, MGM ended up buying out Columbia Pictures, so they ended up owning what they wanted as well as the company. And incidentally, Ursula Andress also starred in this version of Bond, so she's starred in quite a few Bond films when you look into her career. So she was a Swiss actress, and she's a former model, and she has appeared in quite a few Bond films. First appearance was Honey Rider in Doctor No. Then she later starred as Vesper Lind in this was in Casino Royale, and yeah, she was also in other films such as For Texas, She, Perfect Friday, Slave of the Cannibal God, and The Fifth Musketeer in Clash of the Titans in 1981. So, yeah, there we go. How are we doing so far? So, that was Ian Fleming and a brief history of James Bond. So, what should we do and what should we talk about next? Something we could carry on talking about Ursula Andress, I suppose. So, let's jump to Vesper, shall we? Vesper Lind is a fictional character of Ian Fleming's from 1953's James Bond novel Casino Royale. Now, it has actually been played, the character has been played by Ursula Andress as well as Eva Green in the 2006 adaptation. In the novel, the character explains that she was born on a very stormy evening and that her parents named her Vesper, Latin for evening, and Bond then gives her the name to a cocktail he has recently invented, the Vesper. So there we go. So I'm probably going to bring this episode to an end. It's just really, tonight was really just about getting my feet back under the table and going live again, because as I say, I haven't been feeling myself recently. But that's nothing for you guys to worry about. That's what I'm going to say on the matter. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found this episode interesting. If you have, do leave me a comment in the box below. Don't forget to like and subscribe as always. And I'll be back next week with some more movie trivia and chat, as I seem to be branding the channel now. And I'll probably be a bit more better organised as well. As I say, tonight was really just to get my feet back under the table and to get back to doing a live, because I haven't done one for a couple of weeks. So take care of yourselves, and I'll be back next week. Better organised, better show, and who knows what we're going to talk about. I'll put it up on YouTube and give you a heads up. Thanks for watching.